I've been a pianist for so many years, I won't say how many, but I've had a very long career. Started playing with orchestra when I was about 10, the Haydn Concerto, and went to Juilliard, where I worked with some amazing professors. I was very lucky. I was very young, didn't appreciate as much as I do now. Rosina Levine, who was one of the giants of piano teaching, and she had a connection with Rachmaninoff through her husband. Lots of stories about that. Going into her studio was amazing because you almost felt that bond of these great romantic composers. And tempo, of course, is very important to all of this. And another teacher that I had was Erwin Freundlich, and he specialized in Beethoven and Prokofiev. And there were two other teachers there, James Friskin and Edward Steuermann, who really represented the old European school of Germany. And so I learned quite a bit from that as well. So I've done an awful lot of performing. I've done over 50 CDs of a variety of repertoire, from Chopin, certainly the Romantics list, to tangos, another story, another time, and a lot of contemporary music. And I've played 50 concertos. I counted them finally. And I've recorded 19 of them. So Mozart, Bach, D minor, which I ended up conducting, and a ton of other romantic concertos, Chopin, Grieg, I did Strauss Burlesque, and as I said, about 19 were world premieres or first or second performances. I should say that the unfortunate thing is that with contemporary music, you usually only get to perform something once. So if I perform it more than once, it's a real treasure, because you can learn a lot about the relationship with composers and their music and how it changes. So Pierre Boulez, of course, was a very famous conductor, composer, and I just remember performing at the Glenn Gould when he won the big prize. His first piano sonata. I had done the third, and we had talked about that quite a bit in Paris years before that, but they wanted the first. I practiced it like you wouldn't believe, every little detail, because that's what he was, detail-oriented. And the rehearsal for the big concert, which was live, was at 8 in the morning. So I didn't even get a chance to have coffee. And it's difficult music. It was a fugue in 12-tone and all that. So I sat down and started the first movement. And no, I don't want that. I'm looking at, and he comes over and he said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "That's what you've marked." And this went on throughout the whole piece till the third movement. This is where tempo is really important. So I played it, and it's really tough. There's counterpoint, it's fugues, themes have to come out, but it's all, it's really tough. If you lose your focus, that's it. So we kept saying faster and faster, and I sang, finally I said, "Look, I haven't even had coffee. I'm sure it'll be faster by this afternoon." So he said, "I'm going to show you the tempo I want." Sat down and played just the left-hand part, and I thought, okay, no, come on. Like 2 hands come together, that's it. You're not going to have it that fast. And so when I left, I said, "Oh, he was a bit hard," and the others were saying, "Oh my God, no, he's changing everything," which is his prerogative. But it was interesting that from when he wrote it to the present, when I had to play it, a lot of things had changed. But the funny thing was that before I went on stage, he came over and he said, I'm going to sit in the front row so I can see it. And I thought, no, please go away. Don't go in the front row. And then about 5 minutes before he came, he took my hands and he said, I am so sorry, but I'm a little anxious. I'm a little nervous. I'm going to stay backstage and watch it on the TV monitor. And I said, hallelujah, because suddenly I felt freedom. And I thought to myself, I have two choices. I can go as fast as crazy tempo that he wants, and I run the risk of derailing the whole piece, the whole third movement. Or I can think about articulation and make it clean and crisp, which is what I did. He loved it. He kept saying bravo, and he really admired what I had done with the sonata. And I was the only one that he allowed to have photos taken with himself. So that's the experience with composers. And when I'm thinking, working with contemporary ones really have shown me maybe a glimpse as to what it was in the past. Because I think Mozart was a happy guy, maybe not all the time, but that was the image that he had given. I think it's all improv. The ornaments, which have a great deal to do with setting tempos. When I was teaching a couple of courses in Baroque ornamentation or Baroque and classical, I read all the books. And a friend of mine's a musicologist, and we went through all the ornaments. I thought, okay, yeah, I've got them. By the end of like 3 weeks, the students and myself were just depleted of every kind of energy. And then I had to record all the Mozart violin and piano sonatas with Jacques Israelovich, who was the former concert master of the Toronto Symphony, and he had been at Chicago and Lausanne and Switzerland. And he played a lot of Baroque music, had a Baroque violin. And so we started Mozart. I said, what are we going to do with ornaments? We play them the way we think we want them. and so sometimes he would say, I want the ornament like this, and we better copy, do the same. And sometimes he'd say, oh, I don't like what I've come up with. What have you come up with? Oh, I like that. And then we created, there were a few spots where we could improvise. And we thought, let's be free with that. And when I was doing these Mozart concertos, the producer had asked for me to also do that because they wanted something fresh. And so it was really interesting, and it felt wonderful. And I was really pleased with the reviews because American Record Guide picked volume two as a critic's pick, and Gramophone gave it a really wonderful review and said that, I can't remember the exact quote, I don't read my old requotes, but I just remember something about he really enjoyed the operatic line, melodic line that I brought out of the slow movements. I thought, yeah. And I do remember this, the American Record Guide did say this because I remember it, it's hard to say it. Performance, practice, pretty. Thank God these two didn't do that. Just let the music flow. And when you look back in time, what is tempo? Like, what is it based on? And we talked about that before, the intention of the composer, which is almost more important. And it comes out of a vocal tradition. So, I'm talking specifically about piano music here. You've got this tempo and you stick to it, and sometimes it gets too stiff and you become kind of the robot that has to follow that metronome marking instead of breathing and phrasing. So that's very important. I had a quote by Rameau, I probably won't remember it, and he said, in Paris, 1760, I love this, in a word, he talked about what music is. In a word, the expression of thought, of feeling, of passion must be the real object of music. And then Chopin, in his Projet de Méthode, said approximately the same thing: expression or thought through sounds, a manifestation of feeling. And language, it's really all about language. Chopin certainly liked the opera singers and Bellini, and the way they incorporate all the little notes. If you do it with a metronome, it doesn't work. And it's all about expressing language. So throughout history, or dance, like the Bach, I used to make my students look at the YouTube videos of Baroque dances. They had no clue what a minuet looked like, or a bourrée, or anything like that. And when I was recording tangos, that's exactly what I did as well. I took ballroom dances, and then I worked with a dance teacher from Argentina. And before I recorded the tangos, I asked my dance teachers to listen to them, and I said, "Can you dance to this? Do you feel the right beat?" And that's what it was. I never even put the metronome on. The other most important thing with all of this, going back in history, is the instruments. They were quite different. And I played harpsichord for many years. There's no pedal, right? Pedal slows down the tempo a little bit unless you know how to work it properly. But the action of a forte piano is very different. Even the Bechstein, this is a beautiful piano, but some of the modern instruments that started coming up, they couldn't go that fast. And I remember playing Chopin etudes at Juilliard, and they were tough. So the action is heavy. I went to Paris. I played on a Pleyel. I'm sure it was like 100 years old. Not that old, but quite old. Oh, Chopin etude. I could fly, but it still had a give and take with melodic shapes. And Debussy. Oh, I played Debussy all the time. So the pianos changed, and the instruments. The halls in those times were small and different acoustics. Here there's great resonance. I don't know, we'll talk about that, how fast I can play this piece, because it makes a big difference and how it's perceived. So I know with Beethoven there's a lot of discussion about original tempos, and my musicologist friend swears by the original tempos. However, Beethoven was such a wonderful composer that it really doesn't matter. I've heard wonderful performances in slower tempos where you're not aware of tempo as such, you're just aware of the flow of the music. The only downside for performers, and they were speaking of this in some of the articles I read, as lately, or the past 50 years lately, styles change with performances of these pieces. I remember going through so many styles of Beethoven. Just listening on, they have these old recordings that they've kind of recovered. Schnabel with his some very slow tempos, but lovely playing. Mm-hmm. And you've got QWERTY, which is quirky. But I remember as a student, I would go to Carnegie Hall and hear Rudolf Serkin play, and it was very aggressive, fast and aggressive. And then Sviatoslav Richter came, and everybody was saying that he was playing Beethoven incorrectly, but it was so beautiful. But we've slowed down. I'm thinking also of George Gershwin and the era then, the Tin Pan Alley, ragtime. And music was really fast. The pianos were light. Think of the old-fashioned upright honky-tonk pianos in bars, you could really do ragtime. A friend of mine does it, and he's amazing. He does it really fast. Try that on a Steinway, that's a bit stiff. The tempo is different. And one of the set of the 3 preludes that every piano student seems to use for their Royal Conservatory exams, the middle one, which is kind of bluesy. In the 20s, they would have played it much faster. It was totally different, but it's slowed down. And I remember one year when my late husband was a Metropolitan Opera singer, we talked a lot about singing. I decided I was going to work on the last 5 Beethoven sonatas. This was going to be my treat to myself. And I was playing the slow movement. I was really into it. I thought, oh, I'm doing such a great job. That came out. My children, my mother and Louis, with the thumbs down. I said, I thought I was playing brilliantly. Boring. So, we often can't perceive how we're playing and what tempo we're playing. Sometimes we get too into ourselves. And there's been a discussion in a couple of articles I've read, also like Beethoven 8th Symphony, where Norrington and Toscanini took brisk tempos. And Klemperer was almost glacial, slow-moving. I think it's wonderful that a composer can leave that legacy, that it works either way. You're never going to satisfy everybody, especially with Bach or Mozart. And I remember I made my debut in New York, I was 14, with Murray Pariah, who's a wonderful pianist. I played Mozart, he played Beethoven. And he did some pieces that were, the concertos, I should say, he did so beautifully. And I played them for my class and some other pianists. And the class was divided. No, it's too pretty. We don't like that. We like this very crisp one. So I thought both played extremely well, and it's up to us to decide what we like. And we have to follow our own feeling of musicality, and the same with Bach. The other thing that affects tempo, as I said, is pedal. And I love the stories about Bach and Forkel and C.P. Bach, his son who wrote so much. Bach was known to be an extraordinary performer, both on the organ, as you know, with fantastic feet, and also on the clavichord or harpsichord. He was able to make his fingers sing in a lot of different textures, but he always sang. So that phrase, there is a quote, which I can't remember offhand, but I used to use it for my classes, that Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach talked about his father, the cantabile legato playing. How did he do that? So he changed the technique, the fingering technique. He stopped using the thumb. And so the question is, what would he have done on a modern piano, right? And so there's always argument about that. I think such a wonderful composer would probably have adapted and done wonderful, amazing things on a new piano. But if you have a lot of students, they will be divided. And I've always tried to teach them that as long as it's played really well musically, it's all right. And we have that opportunity to play it in different ways because we can't connect with these composers. So by working with a lot of contemporary composers, I began to realize that they change their minds quite often. especially about tempo. And it's funny because on Sunday, I was working with the composer all afternoon. He's written me 12 nocturnes, which I'll be recording in the spring or early summer. And they're based on poetry. Some of my poetry, poetry by an Irish poet and a few others. So he had very fast tempos. So first thing I said on Sunday, can't play, I can't even get my hand over the keyboard that fast from here to here. Oh, he said, I don't know what I was thinking. So we went over it. It's like one I said, it's a dialogue. I can just hear them speaking. So there's no way we can speak, blah, blah. You know, you can't talk that fast. So he said, just pick a tempo that's going to highlight that speech. So again, it goes back to like Rameau, and even before that, I used to play the Fitzwilliam Virginal book. Well, some of those are really fun, and the whole vocal tradition. And that was more important to him than the metronome marking. And we'll actually come up with a metronome marking maybe after we've worked on it for a couple of months. So it's really going to be a reflection of what he would like, an approximate, because as I said, depends on the piano, depends on the acoustics, depends on the performer playing. And we can change our minds because sometimes we get bored with that tempo. We try something else, always have to be fresh. So I remember working with a lot of these composers, the ones that give the performer freedom up to a certain point, right? I mean, they have their vision that I think that's the most important, and their intention. And I always try to get them to write what it is or tell me what do you see, what do you hear, what do you want this. It makes such a difference. So I usually play those much better. But there are those composers that are absolute dictators. They just want it that way. And so I was recording something, and the composer wanted a certain way, which I did. Then he said, it's too loud. I want it intimate. I said, well, maybe you should put triple piano here if that's what you want. But it was with orchestra, right? So I did triple piano, and the piano is supposed to come out of the orchestral. And I said to him, you know, a triple piano, I'm sorry, I know what you want. It's going to have to be moved, but triple piano, the sound will die. It's not going to sound, and you're going to have two blank bars there with no sound. Sure enough, that's what happened. And then he said, oh, you're playing too softly. He didn't say, oh, sorry, you're playing too soft. And then with the rhythms, he said, you're messing up the rhythms. And everybody said, no, we're all messing up the rhythms because we can't hear. So between us, we decided, I had the melodic line. I will be the metronome and play the melodic line, and they'll be able to hear it, because you can't hear like 12 voices. Somebody's got to, you know, that's why we have conductors. So, yeah, we kind of try to work around the composers. So it's interesting, and then you think back to, I wonder what Beethoven was like. He was probably ornery, and you know, some of them are different. And that's the joy of being able to interpret music. I did a little study on one Chopin etude. I used to do this for my classes in piano pedagogy, and they quite enjoyed it. I would bring in either YouTube or, if not available, CDs. And I think for this experiment, I did Chopin Etude in G sharp minor, opus 25, number 6, the double thirds, which is really tricky. And I'm not going to read all of them, but I must have done about 17 to 20 from 1924 to present day, different performances. And I've noticed a trend that they've slowed down a bit. So, and the difference also depends on whether it's live or recorded. Some of the recorded ones are a bit slower than the live ones. So, for example, Sviatoslav Richter, live was 1 minute 46 seconds. And then he went on to play it other times, 1 minute 54, 1 minute 55, 1 minute 58, and finally 2:01 in his later years. Lang Lang, 2:06, was very musical, but a bit heavy. I think one of the best, also live, and it was the fastest, was Mikhail Pletnev, a Russian pianist, did it 1 minute 43 seconds. It flowed. I didn't care how fast it was. Could have been the slowest, but it flowed. It was so musical, luminous. You weren't aware of the speed of it. And Joseph Levine, 152, and his was probably on a light action piano, which made a very big difference in the, I don't know when he recorded this, the 40s, but I do a lot of adjudication, so I had to do it. Floating textures, just delicate, fabulous touch, incredible detail. Alfred Cortot, of about the same era, took 1 minute 53 seconds, which is almost the same. I mean, 1 second difference. I mean, who's joking here? Like, it's the same. And yet it was sloppy and awkward sounding. Trifonov and Danil Trifonov and Valentina Lisitsa are two stars of today. Trifonov 1 minute 56, Lisitsa 1 minute 54, and they were good, not as good as the others. Paulini has a variety of times. He's a bit slower, but who cares? It was still really better. Rosenthal on a very old recording from 1924. So we don't know whether that's really realistic. I don't know how he would have played it today because the piano recordings, but it was 1 minute 45 seconds, but still it doesn't matter because it was a beautiful sound, just stunning. And then there was somebody I don't know, an Ingolf Wunder, who did it in 1 minute 47, and that was, it was like Prestissimo on steroids. But what was the tempo that Chopin had suggested? Allegro moderato, not Prestissimo. That's another question I'll talk. Lucas Debarge from France, I love that pianist. He did it 2 minutes and 8 seconds, so quite a bit, but so musical, so lovely. And so then there are 3 that are almost, how can I put it, are playing today. And I was surprised because Lucas Debarge, 2 minutes 8, Simon Neyrig, very nice also, 2 minutes and 3 seconds. Beatrice Rana, 2 minutes and 17 seconds, also very good. And Lucas Janusius, 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And then there was, I forgot to put his name down, but for the latest Chopin piano competition, he did it also over 2 minutes. I had adjudicated him a couple of years ago. He was very talented. So you can see from the early years, even from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, the time has increased. So I thought that was very interesting. I did that with Bach, but I won't go into that. But that's also fascinating because One of the preludes and fugues, I can't remember now which one, but Gould did it like in an amazing time, and Angela Hewitt took her time. It was like 2 minutes difference. The class was surprised, and they were divided on which they liked better. So I think that's just wonderful when that happens. We can enjoy the different tempos. And this is what music's about. It's not like a painting that you can capture. It's in the air. And then my favorite are some of the composers. Malcolm Bilson from Cornell University had wonderful lectures about all this performance practice. But he also had performances that he had of Bartók and Prokofiev, who were very adamant about you've got to follow that tempo. I couldn't even recognize the piece. One was much slower, one was much faster, and yeah. So that's my opinion on composers. They change their mind. They're human beings. It doesn't bother me a bit. And it's our job as performers, however, to pick something that we can feel. Because if we're just beholden to that one metronomic tempo, we're in trouble, because we're forgetting the music and we're forgetting to breathe. One of the pieces, two of the pieces that I'll play, and the one is short, very short, and the other is a bit longer. I tried to beat my record. Fastest I had done it was 7 minutes and 44 seconds, and I was trying to beat it a few days ago. And that's all I thought of, fast, 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 and I forgot to make it, an interesting piece. The slowest was 9 minutes and 4 seconds when I wasn't feeling very well, and it was a stiff piano, and the hall was, different. The idea of, is it presto, is it prestissimo, is it andante, is really important. And just the feeling, not so much the metronome marking, because I looked up allegretto, and it can be anywhere from 76 to 120 in one book. Another book, it's 92 to 109, which is really small. So I'm doing a Florence Price piano concerto, and the third movement is an allegretto. And I listened to a bunch of performances. Some I thought were too fast, but they're all within a certain time, metronomic time, and so I'm playing it like that, but I'm trying not to think about what the but to put the little ragtime in, to put a little swing in it, I think will be more fun. And I don't know what the hall will be like. So often if you have a very resonant hall, the time's going to be slower because, the sound. So again, I come back to the change of metronomic tempos from, early times to now. I mean, think of big symphony halls now. Can they play that fast? And the instruments are heavier. I played Beethoven's sonata for horn and piano, and we did an experiment. We played it, well, I couldn't do anything but play the piano, but he had a present-day horn, and then he had the old horn with the old valves. Oh, what a glorious sound. Problem was he'd go out of tune frequently, and but I still preferred the old. I mean, it was just really beautiful. And you can't play the same tempo if you're doing Bach on a harpsichord and on the piano. It just doesn't work. And to pedal or not to pedal, the question with Bach, I've had students who just are adamant, no pedal. And teachers that are adamant, no, you can't do pedal, but it sounds not very good. The idea is if you muddy the counterpoint, well, that's bad. No, then you're using way too much pedal. But some of the slow preludes are really like organ preludes, so you need to put touches of pedal there. It's just, I think that the importance is the melodic lines, and to play with articulation. There was an experiment the New York Times did one year. They had a jury of prominent pianists and musicologists listen to Morawetz versus another pianist, whose name I'm not going to mention. At any rate, this was a long time ago, so they've both passed away, but still. So they voted on who played fastest. Well, Morawetz won by a landslide. And then they did what I did. That's how I got the idea. Well, what was the actual time? Well, the other pianist played much faster. So why did he sound very slow? Wasn't articulate. The rhythms weren't crisp. So this is such an important thing in playing these pieces. So you could do a slower metronomic number, but if you play with clarity and articulation and know how to phrase pieces, it's going to sound faster. And working with the composer on Sunday, we found the same thing. So it doesn't matter what era it is. He has these 16th notes, and he didn't have a phrase mark on it. And so I figured that he didn't want, because he was quite detailed, he'd forgotten to phrase it, right? And oh no! And what he wanted was brr. He just wanted the one phrase. But if you do it da 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 da, it's going to sound different. So there are a lot of details that go into this. It's not just the metronome marking. And with Beethoven, I don't know, there's so much controversy, right? You would know better than me about this, but I did read where there was a story that he maybe did not know how to use the metronome yet, or the metronomes were different. I had one of those old metronomes. It was never on time. It was like it would slow down, it would get faster, and then it, slow down completely. And I don't know if, I really don't know if this is true, but a recent article I read was that they'd found Beethoven's old metronome, but part of it was missing, and they were trying to put it together, some Smithsonian article. So who knows? And as I said, from the way I think of Beethoven, it's much more important, the musicality, that you have to think of the sudden changes of dynamic. I love that, forte piano, like there's breathing involved. And so you can't be consistent sometimes. You have to know what the tempo is that, pardon me, you'd like to play in, but then also be able to think of speech. And Beethoven, of course, with Goethe, he was very involved with that. The composers of the past were. So I'm delighted to be working with somebody, his name's David Yeager, who loves poetry and speech, and we talk about that. So the music has to not mimic, but show through the melodic lines and different dynamics, dialogues, and there's a lament, and it already has been played by another pianist, but was really fast. And for me, and I discussed it with him, but the lament is not really fast. So that's very important. Knowing what they meant, and with Beethoven, I think symphonic speech and symphonic mood, texture, all of that. And then, sometimes you can play it really fast. I remember playing the Passionata like breakneck speed. I was young, doing my Carnegie Hall concert, and I remember the Rosina Levine saying, "I want you to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 out loud from beginning to the end of the first movement." Then she made me count the last I was like this. I've never forgotten that, and it felt clean. I felt in control instead of just thinking, appassionata, it's going fast. So it's the intention plus the practicality of performances, and counting is so important. And metronomes give you the pulse, because that's what tempo is, but in between all the beats. I chose Glass House Number 5 by Anne Southam. The first time I ever met her, she had metronome markings, and this is the opposite. They were way too slow with the whole 3-set rivers, and it took me 3 hours, I think, to play through them, and it was so slow I couldn't believe it. At any rate, one day I thought, I'm going to speed some of the faster ones up. The slow ones were fine at her tempo, but they were supposed to be fast, and you need a variety. So I thought, yay, this sounds really good. It sparkles now. It's got texture and everything. And so I invited her to come over. She, of course, wanted to do an archival recording. And I was 8 months pregnant. So I thought, okay, so I didn't know her. I mean, I've worked with composers that were very domineering and others that were very nice, and I was certainly hoping that she was nice, and she was just wonderful. But I figured she wouldn't yell at a pregnant woman. And I said, Anne, you better sit down. I've changed your tempos a bit. And she said, well, let me hear them. And she loved it. And throughout the many years, I knew her for 30 years, this was one of the first pieces I played. You can see. I like it this way with the numbers. She eventually wrote it out, but it's page upon page. You can't turn pages, so I like this version better. But I started much slower, and now I've been experimenting with a lot of fast tempos. And usually they end up being few seconds apart, right? Unless the piano is very stiff, and that's difficult to play, so that might add a minute to it. And then you have to make sure that you make it musical, otherwise you sound like you're some sort of robot playing like a crazy tempo. So she was very generous about that, and she quite enjoyed speed. I've listened to a number of performances that I've done, and doesn't make much difference. It's just a kind of intellectual game I'm playing with myself, is how fast I'm going to play it, and it depends also on your state of mind, because it is tricky. If you lose your numbering here, then you can get into trouble, and it's completely gone. You have to start from the beginning. So recording all of these were one take. Had to be done. Who's going to edit them? Notes going like crazy. So I will try it. Now, what I usually do with live performances is I build up to a crescendo at the very end to ensure I get some applause. But if I'm recording or I'm just sitting here playing, I'm going to end like bookend. I'm going to start soft and end soft, so the climax will come somewhat in the middle, and go in and out, make it a little bit more fun. So there's a lot of things that you can do with this piece, and I experiment with articulation and pedal. And as you know, so this is going to be a real experiment that I'm going to try, because I haven't really tried on this piano. It's fun to do these little challenges. it's quite a tricky subject. I thought I would just add the stuff about Anne Southam. When I toured with the Toronto Dance Theatre, I did a selection of rivers, and they were used to listening to my CD. And when I played it with them, they said, "Oh my God, that's not the tempo on the CD." And I said, "Well, the piano's different. I had a 9-foot Steinway, and now you're giving me like a baby grand that's heavy touch." I said, I'm not going to be able to duplicate these things are kind of live. So the choreographer agreed, but it took a while to get the right tempo. And we came to a compromise, but they had to be able to dance to it. So if I played it too fast, they were out of breath, and they would say, "Please don't play it that fast. We can't move at that tempo." When I recorded it on tape, it was quite a bit slower because that was the very first time I played it. And the Toronto Dance Theatre used the tape for their touring, and then on their 50th anniversary, I said, "Well, you can't be using that tape. It's way too slow. You're going to use my latest CD for it." No, we're using that. And I said, "Well, why?" "Because we can't dance at that fast speed. So for the choreography." So I sat there really petrified at how it was going to sound, but even the slow version sounded really good. I had done different things with it because the slower tempo allowed me to play around with it. Like you might have heard on the two versions I did the slower tempo, I could fool around with little textures, dynamics here, and the faster one just moves like a train. Get out of my way, sort of stuff. So all this depends on so many factors, and our perception of music. But as long as you stay true to making music and not being a robot playing faster, you'll be okay. That's my feeling on tempo.